You don't think that these things are manipulating you? I mean, your phone is one big fat algorithm, and it is going to manipulate the bejesus out of you unless you control it.
What's something that they're not talking about that they should?
And my personal philosophy is be aware and start noticing. Because if you can be aware and start noticing, then you don't have to be reactive and be sitting across the desk talking to a doctor and the doctor saying, well, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Upgraded Biology. And today, you're in for a treat. And I mean treat with regard to food, nutrition, and information. Today, my guest is a very dear friend and colleague, Leanne Ely. And Leanne is a nutritionist, but she's she is the OG. She's a New York Times bestselling author. She is the first person that started putting menus and plannings and what to shop for and how to do it and how to make it easy and how to make sure that you're feeding your family without stress and making sure it's nutritious. She has been doing this since 1993, and she has been blessing her audience for many, many years. She's been on multiple book tours all over the United States. She's been on QVC multiple times and guesting on national television shows, including HCTV, Simple Solutions, ABC Family's Life, Living the Life, Ivanhoe's Smart Women, Small Talk for Parents, and Talk of the Town. And she's a chef. So I could go on and on and on. She teaches cooking classes, and she has a lot of online programs, and we're going to talk about one of them today. So don't miss all of the information, especially at the end, and we'll have the link in the show notes about energy. And yes, your food can be the fuel and the secret weapon to having more energy. Welcome, Leanne. It's so great to see you.
Lovely to see you, Tami.
So how the heck did you get started in nutrition?
It was just, one of those things. I wanted to feed my children better. I wanted to feed me better because, when I was pregnant with both of them, and then it went a step further in that I was really appalled at what was out there called, these kids' meals and how they dumbed down food and, made it into a nugget and a dinosaur and said, here, this is what your children should be eating. And it annoyed me because when I was growing up, we were all fed the same food. There was no separation of church and state, so to speak. And, that's how it was. We were expected to, clean up our plates, of course, blah, blah, blah. And what I realized was children are getting the shaft basically from big food because this is being pushed to parents like this is what your kids will eat and that's all that counts. Not the nutrition, not expanding their palates, not being taught manners at the table because, you don't need a fork and a knife with a dinosaur chicken nugget and a French fry, do you? I mean, it's just all finger food. So the whole thing was just like, this is very disruptive. And it not only ruins the family dinner table, it ruins nutrition for the kid growing up. It hoodwinks the parent into thinking that they're doing their child a service and, with this entertaining food. And the whole thing to me just reeked of corporate greed. So I was just like, I'm putting an end to this and I'm going to teach parents that putting a real food on the table is important. Learning to cook is the equivalent of having good hygiene, and eating together as a family is not only going to be better nutrition for everybody, but it's going to also create a better tight-knit family. And, that's the hill that I died on and lived with for so many years. And now, I've got children in their 30s and both of them are accomplished cooks. Both of them can basically make everything and they'll eat almost anything as well. They have their tastes and what have you. But believe me, they were exposed.
There's some great research about sitting down for a family meal and how it decreases. They don't know how, but it ends up that there's less truancy at school, less drug use, less alcohol use. It's incredible how
it's CASA that did that.
Mm-hmm. But Leanne, it's still unusual. We're really blessed. Our kids are still at home, even though they're in college. And so they have continuously told us, why do we have to have a sit-down meal so many times? Nobody else does this. Mm-hmm. And they're starting to see how the value of it, but it's still not the norm. Why do you think the family meal, sitting down, even if it's like just Sunday dinner, why is this not happening?
I think families are stressed out and pushed way too hard. I mean, think about what your schedules were like. I mean, when my children were little and they were born in the early 90s, and when we were doing, all the activities that came our way, and even though I homeschooled my children, the enormous amount of activities was ridiculous. We didn't have time to take a breath, to prepare the meal, to set the table, to sit down, to have the meal, clean up after it. That takes a portion of your day. And if you don't have the bandwidth for it because you're too busy and have too many activities, your dinner conversation is more like, do you want fries with that? And you're, tossing a bag back in the back seat of the car, and your children, that's another thing. They don't learn the art of the dinner conversation. Like, they're manners at the table. All of that stuff is learned at the family dinner table. And CASA is who you are referring to. CASA is the think tank that did all that research. Not only that, but they showed them that they're less depressed. They're less likely to be obese. They're less likely to use drugs and drink and be promiscuous. It's unbelievable how beneficial the family dinner table is, aside from the nutrition alone. But I think that this hurry up, let's go mentality that we have as families is a huge disservice. And you have to, notice that this is what's happening and you have to opt out of it. That's what I did. And it wasn't popular. My kids, both of them wanted to play soccer, even though, honestly, developmentally, they were too young. I mean, I did the research. I read the books and everything. And, pushing your children into all of these activities at such a young age because you think it's cute is hard on them. It's pressure. And we need to allow them to just be outside and play and get dirty, come inside, take a bath and have dinner and go to bed. It's just the old fashioned values of that have long been dismissed, I think.
It is hard though. I know. I don't know whether, sometimes I don't know whether my experience is growing up in Canada or being Generation X, but we didn't have, like, if we chose to do, for example, soccer, we didn't play soccer every day. And the kids nowadays, if it's not daily, it's almost daily. And they can't even choose two sports because there's no time. Swimming is 5 days a week. And then on the weekends, you're going to have meets. So to opt out is a great option, but who are they going to play with? All their friends are in activities because that's the social part of it. So it does make it challenging. And I think that having the skills that you have taught, like, yes, you can make nutrient dense, delicious food easily so that you can have a meal. You don't have to sit down for an hour and a half and have a whole huge conversation and a big candlelit dinner for a family dinner. You can sit down and have a 20-minute meal where you just are eating together and having some quick conversation, but at least you're eating real food. So where did you learn about how and what real food is? Because I can tell you, we went through, or you could probably tell me better, we went through the non-fat, right? Mm-hmm. Or was it sugar-free or fat-free first? The fads. right?
I'm going to say that it was probably sugar free, because that's when, the saccharin and all the other garbage started to pop up.
Diet
Then we
soda.
went to the non-fat fad, and which just made
And
sugar.
we never got fatter.
No, never. Actually, no. What were the names? Snackwell? Remember those Snackwell cookies and all of that? Oh, I thought that was just like the smartest thing ever. This is back in I believe in the 80s.
And then the nutrition pyramid, which, yeah, right?
The thing of it, if you look at it, with the nutritionist point of view now, that I have now, and you too, with your doctor's eyes, you look at it and you go, you know what, that's diabetes waiting to happen, because it is so carb. I mean, the bottom of the pyramid was all grains, if you remember. So it was just nasty. And I don't know who all came up with that, except that, follow the money and sniff it out. Because, remember they used to say that eggs were evil, and, there's so much about nutrition that has been misconstrued over the years, has been not a full story, hasn't been told, etc. And it really annoys me beyond. It's time for us to just really start saying, okay, so this is truly what it is. There's a lot of people right now, they're going around saying, oh, you just need to eat the carnivore diet, nothing but meat. No, I'm sorry, but no, there's a lot of missing fiber there. There's a lot of nutrients that you're not going to get in meat. Meat is important, but all meat all the time? No, it's just dumb.
Isn't it interesting that the blue zones don't have even, I did a deep dive because I was like, really? Like all of these experts are saying protein, protein, protein. And yes, protein is important. And when you're wanting to lose weight, and a lot of people are using weight loss medication as a tool, which I think is wonderful. But eating protein in any shape and form, as processed powder, as processed bars, as things like that, I don't think your body knows what to do with it. And B, the blue zones eat 20 to 30% of what the experts are pushing. So why do you think that this high protein is just another phase of the sugar-free, fat-free protein high? Like, what do you think in 50 years we'll be saying about this high protein?
Well, I think there's something to be said about increasing your protein as you increase in age. I mean, there's the science is indisputable. It's there. All the research on it, that we need that in order to maintain our bone, in order to maintain muscle, and if we want to build it even more. So I get that. That makes perfect sense. What I don't get is when we take a food and we say this is what it's going to be. It's like back in the 90s, they had the grapefruit diet, or why do we do stupid stuff like that? And we will look back and say this is just another iteration of just one single food, and saying, that's the answer. And I think we just lose our minds a little bit because we see results from doing one thing one way. I've seen this, I've been a nutritionist since 1993. So I have seen it all. And when I was trained from a vegan point of view. And I just was like, ooh, I'm not totally buying into this. Yeah, it was the McDougalls at the time. They were part of the curriculum. And it was not only that, it was low fat. And I was just like, and I'm looking at their pictures and their hair and everything. And, my hairdresser once upon a time said I could always tell a vegan sitting in my chair because I touched their hair, and I thought, it's very interesting. We are omnivores. Our teeth tell the story of how we should be eating. Omnivores mean all the things. So the balance there becomes part of what your biology is about, your age, your sex, your activity level, what it is that you need. And I think the individuality of how nutrition should be looked at is the next upcoming thing. I hope so. Because these blanket statements of everybody should be blah, blah, blah is just garbage. I can't do some of this stuff. I've tried it before and I was just like, you are talking to maybe 80% of an audience. The other 20% are wondering what's wrong with them. And the problem isn't that. The problem is you opening your big mouth and not mentioning the fact that, there's always variables. There always is. And that's the truth. You know that. You've seen that in your own practice.
I've been in practice over 20 years, and I can honestly say that the longer I'm in practice, the more I realize that no one is the same. I couldn't be more confused than I am today about the fact that one size fits all. It absolutely doesn't.
It doesn't.
And even penicillin, this amazing medication that, we have had for such a long time, saved many, many, many lives from infections, kills some people. Literally kills them. They're allergic to it. So individualized. Now, having said that, there are some general rules with regard to nutrition that would lead us to having higher energy. Why don't you share a little bit about what that is and the creation of your online program that was founded on energy? Because I know in my practice, there isn't a single person that says, no, I don't need any more energy. I'm good. Everybody wants more energy.
That's the one thing that I very rarely do private clients anymore, but I still do on occasion have a few private clients. And one of the true lines through everything has always been, I need more energy. I get it. And the older we get, the more energy lagging we become, if you will. And what I found is like when I started to do kind of a deep dive on it, it wasn't just nutrition. I mean, I can tell you, yes, it's going to be individual, but more protein is going to help an older woman, postmenopausal woman, just is for the most part. You'll have to, it's kind of like wearing a continuous glucose monitor. Some things will make your blood glucose spike, and then your husband will just be fine with that bowl of oatmeal in the morning, right? The variables are really weird and different. Everybody's different. But when it comes to energy, I think what we have done is we've built this trap thinking that it all has to do with, I'm just getting older, one, and two, I just need to eat better. And possibly you need to tune things up and possibly you need to take a look at nutrition, but you need to look at all the things. And I have a synergistic view of the whole woman. You are more than just your nutritional needs. You are a heart, mind, body, and soul. And you need to look at all of that. And if your energy is off somewhere, like spiritually, then your energy is likely going to be off and showing up in everywhere else in your life, and you're going to be pinning it on the one thing that you've always had your eyeballs on, what you're eating. So I look at energy from the perspective of everything needs evaluation, and you need, in order to take it back, you need to be looking at the whole thing. And that's my big takeaway, because years and years ago, when I wrote my New York Times bestseller, Body Clutter, the whole thing of the book was coming to this realization. And I wrote this in 2004, I think it was. And I came to this whole realization, I am much more than my jean size, and I'm much more than the color of my lipstick. And I need to start grasping at that and understanding I need to know who I am, not just by what's at the end of my fork and what the scale says in the morning, because my whole world was ruled by that. And I think that's diet culture. That's what the diet culture does. My mother was the Melba toast and coffee in the morning type of a person, because being rail thin was very high on her list of priorities. Of course, her last day, she fell and broke a hip and was dead within a week. So, this is again, she was on hospice and she didn't have long to live anyway. But you know what I'm saying? It's just the focus is off. It isn't just that. It is that and all the other things. That is how we take back our energy. And we also stop being so dismissive of ourselves and saying, I'm just getting older. Well, yeah, everybody's getting older. But wouldn't it be nice for you to look back 10 years from now and say, you know what? I have more energy today than I did 10 years ago. Because I can tell you, hand to God, that's me. Way more energy. And a lot of it has to do with just my perspective being corrected and understanding who I am.
When you mentioned the continuous glucose monitors, and I have my patients use those, and then we go through their readings with their food diary, and they say, well, why is this spiking here? I had a protein breakfast, and is it possible that eggs are causing a protein spike? I was like, what were you doing? What were you thinking? What were you feeling at that time of day? Because people don't realize that stress and the hormones of stress actually raise your blood glucose
100%.
a lot. And it could be that has nothing to do with what you ate. It's what you're thinking and feeling that's causing all of this elevated glucose, this difficulty in losing weight if that was your goal, lowering your inflammation because cortisol and glucose are so inflammatory. So you're right, it is a holistic journey and not just what's on the end of your fork. And I love that, you're bringing to the very top of the conversation that we are more than our lipstick and our scale. And, I grew up in the ballet company. I danced professionally in a ballet company. So being small was the ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. My lunch was a diet tab and an apple. And
yum.
Right. And now my goal is to take up dense space.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if that makes any sense. Like I don't want to be bigger, but I also don't want to be smaller. I want to be like something that has got flexibility and firmness and takes up the space that it takes up. Period. Mm-hmm. Don't want holes. I don't want fluff. I don't want my bones to have holes. I don't want my fat to have lots of filling. I don't want my muscles to be filled with fat. So how do we approach that?
From that exact perspective of stopping, I think one of the things that has been really, really freeing for me is just really concentrating on building muscle. And so that is what I'm doing. I've been very careful. Like this week, for example, I am really pushing it on doing heavy, low reps. And just like 2-3 sets, sometimes 3 sets for like bigger muscles like quads or whatever. But just because I know that this muscle is the armor around my bones, and that those bones are the framework for the quality of my life. When I was 65, I had my DEXA scan, and it came back that my bones were the same bones that a 30-year-old DEXA scan would look like. And my doctor was very pleased with that. She said, we never see this. And I said, well, she said, and there's nothing, not even a little bit in the neck, nothing. And I said, well, fabulous, and she said, well, what are you doing? And it was the pickleball, which is, I play competitive pickleball and you're constantly jarring it's the same thing that Dr. Vonda,
right.
Forgot her last name.
Dr. Vonda, right. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I love her because she talks about, how you need to jar your bones. Well, if you're playing pickleball, the way I play pickleball, you're jarring it all the time. I need to do that jump stuff. I'm jumping and running and, sidestep, doing all that stuff. And then I train in the gym for my sport. I do extra stuff. Like my shoulders are built, and my shoulders are built because I'm protecting those shoulders as a 67-year-old woman from when I do those overhead smashes, because I don't want that frozen shoulder. I don't want all that trouble with shoulders. I've seen so many people in my community, because I do play competitively and I do tournaments and what have you, joint replacement, like knees, hips, shoulders, knees, hips, shoulders. It's just like, lions and tigers and bears. It's unbelievable. And I'm like, okay, so what do I need to do in order to strengthen the thing that could be vulnerable? I'm not going to give up pickleball. I'm going to learn to dynamically stretch correctly. I am going to learn how to lift weights in a way that is going to be protective, not just so that I look better, in a bathing suit or whatever. That's a bonus, but also so that I'm protecting myself. What do I have to do? Figured that out. And then how do I eat? So the whole thing is coming from the premise that I am an athlete and I am an athlete in training. And I don't know if you saw Peter Attia's 60 Minutes thing that was just like this week. So good. And I mean, this is exactly what he said. If you are of a certain age, you should be training like an athlete. And I was screaming at the TV, yes, of course. Because if we do have that kind of an attitude, then we're understanding and noticing what it is that we need to do in order to get the result that we want. The result that I want is, if I fall in the pickleball court, I'm going to get up. I might have a bruised butt, but I'm not going to break a hip. I'm not going to break my wrist. I'm not going to break anything unless somebody takes me and throws me down like that. I know that I am resilient, and resilience is everything, because I've got the next 20 years, hopefully, next 30 years of being like this. And if I continue on this path, that's what's going to keep me there. It's not ever just one thing. That's the other thing. That's the big lesson of my life. That it is never just one thing. It's all the things. And when we bring them in and we start using them the way that we should, that's what brings us back into the quality of life. I have more energy at 67 than I did at 57. I am stronger, more resilient, tougher. I mean, I remember when I was 57, I'd do whatever. I'm doing little puny, 8 pounds dumbbells. So, that's the whole thing, is like, we have to look at what can we do in order to be stronger? What can we do in order to have more energy? And it always, it always comes full circle like that. That's how I look at it.
So we've talked about exercise. Excuse me, I'm going to tell her that she has to. Thank you for joining us. We talked about how you feel. We talked about it's not just one thing. We talked about exercise, and we've mentioned nutrition. But what does a 40, 50, 60-year-old want to focus on in a holistic, not narrow tunnel vision, fad-oriented way for energy? For making deposits in your health bank account for today, but is earning you interest for the energy of tomorrow?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it really depends on a lot on lifestyle. For example, a 30 to 40-year-old woman with 3 kids versus a 30 to 40-year-old woman who doesn't have children and doesn't have maybe the same kind of lifestyle and hecticness and all of that, is going to have different goals, obviously. But I would say that if I could go back, my new book, by the way, is called If I Were 50 Again. This is exactly what I would do differently after the viral video that I did. And that's going to be coming out soon. But if I could go back to perimenopause, because I remember, and nobody said, Leanne, you're in perimenopause, by the way. I don't know. Yeah, it was just, here I was like with plantar fasciitis, getting, frozen shoulder, and, that's when the thyroid stuff started. All these things happened, and nobody mentioned, oh, well, that's what this is about. Not a word. But I would understand with today's information that's coming out and with all the great, I mean, you can get it on an Instagram, for heaven's sake, so much good information. You can get it on TikTok. You can get good information from very qualified experts who are saying, girlfriend, this is what's happening. I would become an expert on my own body of what's going on. Where am I? I would go to the doctor and I would say, take a look at my, what is the FSH? But take a look at that. Where am I on that? Am I going through perimenopause? Am I close? Where am I? I would want that information. I would start HRT as soon as if I had a good qualified doctor, of course, that goes without saying. I would start it as soon as I could possibly start it, instead of starting it when menopause stuff all started happening. And then I would also, again, according to my lifestyle, according to my activity level, I would look at my activity and saying, am I setting myself up for success for later? Am I weight training? Am I flexible? Is my balance good? Just all these different things, and make a program for myself based on that, and have the confidence to know it can always be adjusted. It doesn't need to be perfect. And the food is just really basic. If we eat an anti-inflammatory diet and adjust the amount of protein, adjust the amount of food or whatever, depending on what our bodies needs, I think it just kind of washes out and into a different thing. If you and I are standing side by side, and I think we're about the same height, you're tall, willowy, thin, and very much the ballerina figure. I look like, that girl lifts some weights. That girl, you'd see the musculature on me. And you would also say, no one would say she's thin and willowy like a ballerina, ever. Two different body sizes, but we both have the goals of wanting the density of muscle on our bodies. What is that going to look like? Well, it depends on your goals, and it also depends on your body structure. And making peace with that has been a big deal for me, because I've always been the girl with the butt. I've always been the girl that has, the butt and the boobs. And, okay, so deal with it, and then get your eyes on the prize. And your eyes on the prize is that muscle, because it's neuroprotective as well. And that it's everything about it sets you up. So at 30 to 40 years old, with your eye toward that, your program will self-evolve. It's always about noticing, becoming aware, and then making corrective actions. And there you go. It's simple. Not easy.
Speak to me like I'm 10 years old, and help me understand what an anti-inflammatory diet is.
Okay, let's see. So let's pretend we're in the grocery store. And you say, oh, look, it's Halloween, candy apples. And I'll say, oh, yeah. And look, right next to it are just regular apples without all that stuff on it. Well, I want the candy apple. And I'd say, but let's look at the apple. The apple doesn't have the sugary stuff on the outside. The sugary stuff basically tells your body, let's start a little fire inside. And your body says inside, is saying to you, no fires. I don't want a fire in there. This is a body. This isn't a fireplace. This isn't a campfire. This is a body. Well, if we got the apple would say to your body, how about this one? And your body would say, you know what? Delicious. I like that. I can use every single thing that you give me from that apple. No fires being started. It's just going to give me everything that I need. So those are the difference between two things that are kind of the same. One's an apple, the other one's an apple, but the coating on the apple makes the difference.
So an anti-inflammatory diet, one of the cornerstones is avoid sugar, or added sugar is what I hear with this great comparison that you had about a candy-coated apple versus a plain apple. What else are you telling my 10-year-old self about an anti-inflammatory diet? Let's just go through the day. I choose an apple for a snack. How else am I going to pick? I'm at camp and I get to pick my own food. Tell my 10-year-old self how to pick an anti-inflammatory food.
I actually did this with my children. And taught them this. And as they got older, of course, they pushed back. You know how it is. They want the Lunchables. But what I would say is if you can choose something that is a one ingredient food, it's going to be a whole lot better for you than something that has, if you pick it up and there's a big list on there of stuff that you can't even pronounce. Because if you can't pronounce it, there's a good chance that your body doesn't know what to do with it. Our bodies haven't changed. And so if we're putting all these weird chemicals and things in it, it doesn't know what do we do with that? You know, maybe we'll get lucky and, poop it out, or we could get it stored in our fat only to be used against us later and have it really harm us. That's the definition of an inflammatory food. So for me, it was all about teaching my children that, one of their big complaints when they were growing up was, we don't have food in this house. We have ingredients.
The same comment.
I was like, oh my gosh, it's like everything is, and I said, no, I mean, we have all kinds of they wanted snacks. We have all kinds of snacks. So I'd say there's like little mozzarella pulled cheesy things, I fell for those. We had we had apples, of course. And I'll make you some popcorn. We didn't have microwave popcorn, but I'd make it homemade for them. Organic, of course, with, real butter. It's just the difference. And that's why I get so annoyed with big food, because it's just taken away just these basicness of food and given us this inflammatory garbage. And I don't know, it just really upsets me, because it just sets people up for a lifetime of problems, a lifetime. And they're addicted early,
Well, we are genetically hardwired to this day, as you mentioned, our bodies just really haven't caught up or changed very much. And we're drawn to things that allow us to store fat, sweet, fat. So, this is great. This represents abundance, and I can have more of it, and I can store it up for winter later on.
Like a squirrel.
There's a scarcity, but there's no scarcity ever. You can get Haagen-Dazs and everything at 2 a.m. on a Thursday. I mean, it's just insane. So what I hear you saying is an anti-inflammatory diet is actually incredibly simple.
100%.
It's just look for things that have single ingredient or the fewest ingredients. I was shopping, as I've gotten older, my taste buds have changed, and I really am loving crunchy salty. Probably has a lot to do with being really busy as well. My adrenals are saying we would prefer some salt. Mm-hmm. And I take magnesium and things like that, so I'm not craving the dark chocolate anymore. But there's these dried vegetables. I'm like, oh, awesome. I can have this instead of chips, because I love replacements. It's really hard to remove, but easier to replace.
Sure.
So I don't know why I thought to read the back of dried vegetables, because one would assume that dried vegetables are dried vegetables. They
One
put
would.
sugar in it.
Of course there was.
Bloody hell.
But that's the interesting thing too. We have to understand the psychology behind all these packaged foods. Their goal is to get you to buy it and to get you to buy it again and again and again. So they're going to manipulate flavor any way that they can. No one can eat just one. We remember that. That's like a classic Lay's potato chip commercial from way back when. But it's also a big tell of what's going on in big food. They purposefully put these excitotoxins and what have you in there to get your taste buds going. I remember when I was like in high school or whatever and eating nacho cheese Doritos. I thought that was like the best thing ever. I could just eat them and eat them and eat them. They were disgusting, with all their stuff in it. And I will tell you, I was at a tournament just in September, and they had this big basket of nacho cheese. And I was like, oh man, it's been a minute. And I just finished. I was all sweaty. And, I love the salty and crunchy, especially right after a tournament. And I've just sweat my buns off. And so I opened the bag, I ate one, and I was like, I felt like I'd lit my tongue on fire. The roof of my mouth felt weird and fuzzy. And I was like, what's this about? What is this about? And, then later it tasted okay, but I wasn't tempted to go back to that bag and eat it. As a matter of fact, I threw it away. But I thought it was just so interesting because I was thinking, yeah, this is it. This is how they get you hooked. This is what they're doing. And it's totally on purpose. Fast food's the same way. All of this is cheap chemicals, get them hooked, drag them in, and make them forget that they need to feed their bodies, that their bodies need the nutrition. And I also, my own theory, I've heard this before from other people, it's not proven, but it makes sense, that the reason that people end up becoming so morbidly obese and what have you is because their bodies are screaming for nutrition and they just keep eating. That's the thing, you don't have the magnesium, keep eating. Well, finally, we'll get that magnesium somehow. So just another bag of chips might have the magnesium, so that's the whole, that's the thing that just gets me. It's just how awful. And I think it is so irresponsible and wrong to do this in the name of profit and ruin somebody's life and health.
It also changes your gut microbiome. So you're feeding different bugs that thrive on those foods. And then those bugs actually are creating neurotransmitters and affecting how you think and how you feel. And then they create the cravings and they literally are screaming at you like a heroin addict because those bugs don't want to die. They want to be fed the same food and you have an abundance of them and they're overcrowding the other microbiome. So it's just so far reaching. So taking
shop of horrors.
Exactly. So taking control, having single ingredient food. I have the philosophy that our bodies already are quite a bit more resilient than we give them credit for. I figure if you're going to be feeding your cells 80% of the time, your body can handle feeding your satisfaction. You had a taste of Doritos because you're like, I wonder what this is going to taste like. You didn't have to be so rigid in, no, I can't ever have those. They're terrible. So having an anti-inflammatory diet with single ingredient foods is a pathway to having abundant energy. Looking at your whole life holistically. Are you making muscle? Are you training? What are you sleeping? How are you feeling? Do you have a spiritual connection with what your life is about? Is there anything else before we finish that you could share with our audience that really would be like a secret? A missing piece.
There's piece.
So much garbage information on social media about health and nutrition. That's part of why I do this podcast, is to try and, cut through all the noise. But what's something that they're not talking about that they should?
Well, I'm starting to see it a little bit more, but it's nervous system regulation and just the simplicity of the whole thing. And I think one of the reasons why is because it's really, you don't have to, you can't really monetize it because it's just little things that you can do for yourself to regulate your nervous system. Gargling, for example, humming, calms your vagus nerve. I mean, these kind of things I didn't know 10 years ago. I knew about the vagus nerve. I didn't understand, how I just knew I was stressed out, and we talked about stress a lot and nobody wanted to talk about it. They wanted to talk about weight loss, or they wanted to talk about body recompositioning, or, some such thing like that. And I get it's a sexier subject. It really is. Nobody wants to talk about stress. Everybody's stressed. What are you kidding me? But now the whole thing is understanding that. And my personal philosophy is be aware and start noticing. Because if you can be aware and start noticing, then you don't have to be reactive and be sitting across the desk talking to a doctor and the doctor saying, well, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but, we have to check back in with ourselves, and regulating your nervous system is one thing that you can do simply. Getting enough sleep is one thing that you can do very simply. You can put yourself to bed at a decent hour. You do not need your mommy to do it for you. You can do it yourself. You are a grown-up. That's
you
a
don't
big
need your phone or your
Oh,
iPad
for
or
the love of God.
television.
Yes. Stop with the screens already. Stop scrolling. And if we understand that nutrition can be manipulated by big food, you don't think that these things are manipulating you? I mean, your phone is one big fat algorithm, and it is going to manipulate the bejesus out of you unless you control it. How do we do that? We are noticing and we are aware that this is indeed what's going on. This is the undercurrent of what's going on any kind of screen. They want our attention. They want our dollars. They want us to keep buying the same thing over and over again, to our detriment. It has nothing to do with making you better and making you well. What makes you well and what makes you better is you noticing what works for you and what does not, and understanding everyone's got an agenda. What's yours?
Oh, that's such a perfect place to end. What's yours? And you are the CEO of your health. I love it.
Right on.
Thank you so much for sharing your brilliance. We will have in the show notes how people can get in touch with you and access your amazing programs. And of course, we're going to be seeing you on Mastering Your Menopause as well. And I hear there's a book coming up. So hopefully we can see you again when that's ready to launch, and all the best to you.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on. Enjoyed it.
It's so fun. Have a beautiful day. And thanks everybody for giving us your most precious commodity, which is your time. And remember, health can be contagious. Please share, like, and pass this on to a friend or someone that you love. Have a beautiful day.